Chapter 18 of The Log of a Cowboy by Andy Adams. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The North Platte. It was now July. We had taken on new supplies at Ogallala, and a week afterwards the herd was snailing along the North Platte on its way to the land of the Blackfeet. It was always hard to get a herd past a supply point. We had the same trouble when we passed Dodge. Our long hours in the saddle, coupled with the monotony of our work, made these supply points of such interest to us that they were like oases in desert lands to devotees on pilgrimage to some consecrated shrine. We could have spent a week in Ogallala and enjoyed our visit every blessed moment of the time. But now, a week later, most of the headaches had disappeared, and we had settled down to our daily work. At Horse Creek, the last stream of water before entering Wyoming, a lad who cut the trail at that point for some cattle companies, after trimming us up, rode along for half a day through their range and told us of an accident which happened about a week before. The horse of some peeler, working with one of Shanghai Pierce's herds, acted up one morning and fell backwards with him so that his gun accidentally discharged. The outfit lay over a day and gave him as decent a burial as they could. We would find the new-made grave ahead on Squaw Creek, beyond the crossing to the right-hand side in a clump of cottonwoods. The next day, while watering the herd at this creek, we all rode over and looked at the grave. The outfit had fixed things up quite nicely. They had built a square pen of rough cottonwood logs around the grave, and had marked the head and foot with a big flat stone, edged up, heaping up quite a mound of stones to keep the animals away. In a tree his name was cut. Sounded natural, too, though none of us knew him, as Pierce always drove from the East Coast country. There was nothing different about this grave from the hundreds of others which made landmarks on the old Western Trail, except that it was the latest. That night around the campfire, some of the boys were moved to tell their experiences. This accident might happen to any of us, and it seemed rather short notice to a man enjoying life, even though his calling was rough. "As for myself," said Rod Wheat, "I'm not going to fret. You can't avoid it when it comes, and every now and then you miss it by a hair. I had an uncle who served 4 years in the Confederate Army, went through 30 engagements, was wounded half a dozen times, and came home well and sound. Within a month after his return, a plow handle kicked him in the side, and we buried him within a week." "Oh, well," said Fox, commenting on the sudden call of the man whose grave we had seen, "it won't make much difference to this fellow back here when the horn toots and the graves give up their dead. He might just as well start from there as anywhere. I don't envy him none, though. But if I had any pity to offer now, it would be for a mother or sister who might wish that he slept nearer home." This last remark carried our minds far away from their present surroundings to other graves which were not on the trail. There was a long silence. We lay around the campfire and gazed into its depths, while its flickering light threw our shadows out beyond the circle. Our revelry was finally broken by Ash Borrowstone, who was by all odds the most impressionable and emotional one in the outfit, a man who always argued the moral side of every question, yet could not be credited with possessing an iota of moral stamina. Gloomy as we were, he added to our depression by relating a pathetic incident which occurred at a child's funeral, when Flood reproved him, saying, "Well, neither that one you mentioned nor this one of Pierce's man is any of our funeral. We're on the trail with Lovell's cattle. You should keep nearer the earth." There was a long silence after this reproof of the foreman. It was evident that there was a gloom settling over the outfit. Our thoughts were ranging wide. At last Rod Wheat spoke up and said that in order to get the benefit of all the variations, the blues were not a bad thing to have. But the depression of our spirits was not so easily dismissed. In order to avoid listening to the gloomy tales that were being narrated around the campfire, a number of us got up and went out as if to look up the night horses on picket. The Rebel and I pulled our picket pins and changed our horses to fresh grazing, and after lying down among the horses, out of hearing of the camp, for over an hour, returned to the wagon expecting to retire. A number of the boys were making down their beds, as it was already late, but on our arrival at the fire, one of the boys had just concluded a story as gloomy as the others which had preceded it. "These stories you are telling tonight," said Flood, "remind me of what Lige Link said to the book agent when he was shearing sheep." "I reckon," said Lige, "that book of yours has a heap sight more poetry in it than there is in shearing sheep. I wish I had gone on guard tonight, so I could have missed these stories." At this juncture the first guard rode in, having been relieved, and John Officer, who had exchanged places on guard that night with Moss Strayhorn, remarked that the cattle were uneasy. "This outfit," said he, "didn't half water the herd today. 1/3 of them hasn't bedded down yet, and they don't act as if they aim to, either. There's no excuse for it in a well-watered country like this. I'll leave the saddle on my horse, anyhow." "Now that's the result," said our foreman, "of the hour we spent around that grave today, when we ought to have been tending to our job. This outfit," he continued, when Officer returned from picketing his horse, "have been trying to hold funeral services over that Pierce man's grave back there. You'd think so anyway, from the tales they've been telling. I hope you won't get the sniffles and tell any." "This letting yourself get gloomy," said Officer, "reminds me of a time we once had at the J.H. camp in the Cherokee Strip. It was near Christmas, and the work was all done up. The boys had blowed in their summer wages and were feeling glum all over. One or two of the boys were lamenting that they hadn't gone home to see the old folks. This gloomy feeling kept spreading until they actually wouldn't speak to each other. One of them would go out and sit on the woodpile for hours all by himself and make a new set of good resolutions. Another would go out and sit on the ground on the sunny side of the corrals and dig holes in the frozen earth with his knife. They wouldn't come to meals when the cook called them. Now Miller, the foreman, didn't have any sympathy for them. In fact, he delighted to see them in that condition. He hadn't any use for a man who wasn't dead tough under any condition. I've known him to camp his outfit on alkali water, so the men would get out in the morning, and every rascal beg leave to ride on the outside circle on the morning roundup. Well, 3 days before Christmas, just when things were looking gloomiest, there drifted up from the Cheyenne country one of the old-timers. None of them had seen him in 4 years, though he had worked on that range before, and with the exception of myself, they all knew him. He was riding the chuck line all right, but Miller gave him a welcome, as he was the real thing. He had been working out in the Panhandle country, New Mexico, and the devil knows where, since he had left that range. He was meaty with news and scary stories. The boys would sit around and listen to him yarn, and now and then a smile would come on their faces. Miller was delighted with his guest. He had shown no signs of letting up at 11 o'clock the first night, when he happened to mention where he was the Christmas before. "There was a little woman at the ranch," said he, "wife of the owner, and I was helping her get up dinner, as we had quite a number of folks at the ranch. She asked me to make the bear sign, doughnuts she called them, and I did, though she had to show me how some little. Well, fellas, you ought to have seen them. Just sweet enough, brown to a turn, and enough to last a week. All the folks at dinner that day praised them. Since then, I've had a chance to try my hand several times, and you may not tumble to the diversity of all my accomplishments, but I am an artist on bear sign." Miller arose, took him by the hand, and said, "That's straight now, is it?" "That's straight. Making bear sign is my long suit." "Mouse," said Miller to one of the boys, "go out and bring in his saddle from the stable and put it under my bed. Throw his horse into the big pasture in the morning. He stays here until spring, and the first spear of green grass I see, his name goes on the payroll. This outfit is shy on men who can make bear sign. Now, I was thinking that you could spread down your blankets on the hearth, but you can sleep with me tonight. You go to work on this specialty of yours right after breakfast in the morning, and show us what you can do in that line." They talked quite a while longer, and then turned in for the night. The next morning after breakfast was over, he got the needed articles together and went to work. But there was a surprise in store for him. There was nearly a dozen men lying around, all able eaters. By 10 o'clock he began to turn them out, as he said he could. When the regular cook had to have the stove to get dinner, the taste which we had had made us ravenous for more. Dinner over, he went at them again in earnest. A boy riding towards the railroad with an important letter dropped in, and as he claimed he could only stop for a moment, we stood aside until he had had a taste, though he filled himself like a poisoned pup. After eating a solid hour, he filled his pockets and rode away. One of our regular men called after him, "Don't tell anybody what we got." We didn't get any supper that night. Not a man could have eaten a bite. Miller made him knock off along in the shank of the evening, as he had done enough for one day. The next morning after breakfast, he fell to at the bear sign once more. Miller rolled a barrel of flour into the kitchen from the storehouse, and told him to fly at them. "About how many do you think you'll want?" asked our bear sign man. "That big tub won't be any too many," answered Miller. "Some of these fellows haven't had any of this kind of truck since they were little boys. If this gets out, I look for men from other camps." The fellow fell to his work like a thoroughbred, which he surely was. About 10 o'clock, 2 men rode up from a camp to the north, which the boy had passed the day before with the letter. They never went near the dugout, but straight to the kitchen. That movement showed that they were on to the racket. An hour later, old Tom Cave rode in, his horse all in a lather, all the way from Garrettson's camp, 25 miles to the east. The old sinner said that he had been on the frontier some little time, and that these were the best bear sign he had tasted in 40 years. He refused to take a stool and sit down like civilized folks, but stood up by the tub and picked out the ones which were a pale brown. After dinner, our man threw off his overshirt, unbuttoned his red undershirt, and turned it in until you could see the hair on his breast. Rolling up his sleeves, he flew at his job once more. He was getting his work reduced to a science by this time. He rolled his dough, cut his dough, and turned out the fine brown bear sign to the satisfaction of all. His capacity, however, was limited. About 2 o'clock, Doc Langford and 2 of his peelers were seen riding up. When he came into the kitchen, Doc swore by all that was good and holy that he hadn't heard that our artist had come back to that country. But any one that was noticing could see him edge around to the tub. It was easy to see that he was lying. This luck of ours was circulating faster than a secret amongst women. Our man, though, stood at his post like the boy on the burning deck. When night came on, he hadn't covered the bottom of the tub. When he knocked off, Doc Langford and his men gobbled up what was left. We gave them a mean look as they rode off, but they came back the next day 5 strong. Our regular men around the camp didn't like it, the way things were going. They tried to act polite, too. "Calling bear signs doughnuts," interrupted Quince Forrest, "reminds me what—" "Will you kindly hobble your lip?" said Officer. "I have the floor at present. As I was saying, they tried to act polite to company that way, but we hadn't got a smell the second day. Our man showed no signs of fatigue, and told several good stories at night. He was tough. The next day was Christmas, but he had no respect for a holiday, and made up a large batch of dough before breakfast. It was a good thing he did, for early that morning, Original John Smith and 4 of his peelers rode in from the west, their horses all covered with frost. They must have started at daybreak. It was a good 22-mile ride. They wanted us to believe that they had simply come over to spend Christmas with us. Company that way, you can't say anything. But the easy manner in which they gravitated around that tub, not even waiting to be invited, told a different tale. They were not nearly satisfied by noon. Then who should come drifting in as we were sitting down to dinner but Billy Dunlap and Jim Hale from Quinlan's camp, 30 miles south on the Cimarron. Dunlap always holed up like a bear in the winter, and several of the boys spilled their coffee at the sight of him. He put up a thin excuse, just like the rest. Anyone could see through it. But there it was again. He was company. Lots of us had eaten at his camp and complained of his chuck. Therefore, we were nice to him. Miller called our man out behind the kitchen and told him to knock off if he wanted to. But he wouldn't do it. He was clean strain. I'm not talking. Dunlap ate hardly any dinner, we noticed, and the very first batch of bear sign turned out. He loads up a tin plate and goes out and sits behind the storehouse in the sun, all alone in his glory. He satisfied himself out of the tub after that. He and Hale stayed all night, and Dunlap kept everyone awake with the nightmares. Yes, kept fighting the demons all night. The next morning Miller told him that he was surprised that an old gray-haired man like him didn't know when he had had enough, but must gorge himself like some silly kid. Miller told him that he was welcome to stay a week if he wanted to, but he would have to sleep in the stable. It was cruel to the horses, but the men were entitled to a little sleep, at least in the winter. Miller tempered his remarks with all kindness, and Dunlap acted as if he was sorry, and as good as admitted that his years were telling on him. That day, our man filled his tub. He was simply an artist on bear sign. "Calling bear sign doughnuts," cut in Quince Forrest again, as soon as he saw an opening, "reminds me of what the little boy said who went—" But there came a rumbling of many hoofs from the bed ground. "There's hell for you," said half a dozen men in a chorus, and every man in camp ran for his horse but the cook, and he climbed into the wagon. The roar of the running cattle was like approaching thunder, but the flash from the six-shooters of the men on guard indicated that they were quartering by camp, heading out towards the hills. Horses became so excited that they were difficult to bridle. There was plenty of earnest and sincere sweating done that night. All the fine sentiment and melancholy of the hour previous vanished in a moment, and the men threw themselves into their saddles, riding deep, for it was uncertain footing to the horses. Within 2 minutes from the time the herd had left the bed ground, 14 of us rode on their left point and across their front, firing our six-shooters in their faces. By the time the herd had covered a scant mile, we had thrown them into a mill. They had run so compactly that there were no stragglers, so we loosened out and gave them room. But it was a long time before they relaxed any, but continued going round and round like a water wheel or an endless chain. The foreman ordered 3 men on the heaviest horses to split them. The men rode out a short distance to get the required momentum, wheeled their horses, and wedge-shaped struck the sea of cattle and entered. But it instantly closed in their wake as though it had been water. For an hour they rode through the herd back and forth, now from this quarter, now from that, and finally the mill was broken. After midnight, as luck would have it, heavy dark clouds banked in the northwest, and lightning flashed, and before a single animal had lain down, a drizzling rain set in. That settled it. It was an all-night job now. We drifted about hither and yon. Horses, men, and cattle turned their backs to the wind and rain and waited for morning. We were so familiar with the signs of coming day that we turned them loose half an hour before dawn, leaving herders, and rode for camp. As we groped our way in that dark hour before dawn, hungry, drenched, and bedraggled, there was nothing gleeful about us, while Bob Blades expressed his disgust over our occupation. "If I ever get home again," said he, and the tones of his voice were an able second to his remarks, "you all can go up the trail that want to, but here's one chicken that won't. There isn't a cowman in Texas who has money enough to hire me again."
"Aw, hell now," said Bull. "You oughtn't let a little rain ruffle your feathers that way. Cheer up, sonny. You may be rich some day yet and walk on Brussels and velvet." Chapter 19